this book can be proven to be corrupt in just a few moments. You just start reading it at the beginning, and here's just a real quick, easy way that everybody's going to understand, just to show you this book's corrupt. Who's ever read through Genesis 5, where he goes through how old everybody was when they had their kids up to Noah, and then you kind of did the math? Whoever got out a piece of paper and pen and did the math and added up how long it was from the creation to the flood? How long was it? Yeah, 1,656 years, right? 1,656 years. It's pretty easy math. We've all done it. You know, you figure that out. Well, here's the thing about that. If you do a little bit of digging in that chapter and kind of draw it out on a piece of paper, there's a guy named Methuselah. And Methuselah was the oldest man who ever lived because he lived to be 969 years old. And if you do the math, you'll notice that Methuselah dies the exact year of the flood. The exact year. So people have wondered, like, did he die in the flood? Did he drown at that age? Or maybe God was waiting for him to die and then he's going to bring the flood. Those are two different views. And they both make sense, right? Maybe God's waiting for this guy to die, then he brings the flood. Or maybe the guy drowned. He lived to be 969 and then he drowned. But anyway, when you read it in the Septuagint and you do the same math, you find that instead of 1,656 years, it's 2,256 years. So they've padded the numbers to make it 600 more years. Probably because they're in Egypt, and the Egyptians had their own mythology, so they're probably trying to match the Egypt calendar of how far back things went. So they doctor the numbers. But here's the amazing thing. If you do the math in the Septuagint, this book that I'm holding in my hand right here, this fake so-called origin Septuagint, you'll find that Methuselah dies 14 years after the flood. So this old man could tread water. According to this book, the flood's for like a year and he's on some driftwood or whatever. He's like 900 years old.
Well done! Well done!
Or else is he a stowaway on the ark? What's going on? So they messed with the numbers, obviously on purpose. You're not going to make a mistake like that. They get all the numbers wrong. They changed them on purpose. That's not translating. Look, when you're translating, you don't change numbers. But this translation has Methuselah live an additional 14 years after the flood. That should just show you right here that this thing's a piece of junk, and you're only on a few pages into the thing. If you do the math in the Septuagint, this book that I'm holding in my hand right here.
Okay, let's just talk about this book that he's holding in his hand right here.
This fake so-called origin.
Okay, what is he holding in his hand? He's holding in his hand the Greek Septuagint. Okay. And the very thing that he's holding in his hand, I actually have right here. Okay, this is called Septuagint with Apocrypha by Brenton. This is Brentons Septuagint. Okay, now that's the thing that he's holding in his hand. And let me just move over here. If I zoom in on this picture here, okay, you see what he's holding in his hand? Okay, that is exactly what I have here. Okay, that's what he's holding in his hand. All right, let me look at another screenshot here. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, that's what he's holding in his hand. He's holding a Brentons Septuagint, and he's talking about how if you get Brentons Septuagint, it has Methuselah outliving the flood. Methuselah outlives the flood by 14 years. Well, the really ironic thing about this is if you actually look at this, if you actually, open it up, which you would think he would have actually looked into it, but he didn't, because if he did, he would have found what's going on here. So notice how it says here, it says, and Methuselah lived 167 years. Okay? When you do the math with 167 years for Methuselah, this is in Genesis 5:25 in Brentons Septuagint, then yeah, it has Methuselah outliving the flood by 14 years. He survives the flood, which is ridiculous and wrong. There's only 8 people that came off the ark. Methuselah would be a 9th person. That's wrong. But notice right here, do you see this thing right here? I don't even know really what that thing is. I think it's a Greek symbol. And if only my camera would focus. Okay, do you see right here that little bee-like thing? Okay, 100. That's a marginal note. And when you look that down here in the marginal, there it is. There's that bee-like thing. And what do we see here? It says Alex 187 years. Okay, what does that mean? Alex 187 years. Let me explain just exactly what this means for anybody who doesn't understand the Septuagint. If you go to the beginning of the Septuagint, look in the preface here, you'll notice here how it talks about how it says that it says, and the Greek text in Brentons edition is based on Vaticanus. Now, Vaticanus is a copy of the Septuagint. It's called Codex Vaticanus. They found it in the Vatican in Rome. Okay? So Brenton's edition of the Septuagint is based on Vaticanus. That's a copy of the Septuagint. It's an early 4th century manuscript of the Septuagint, with some reliance on other texts, particularly Alexandrinus, which is a 5th century manuscript. So Alexandrinus, this is also an ancient copy of the Septuagint from the 5th century. So Brenton is drawing upon 2 ancient copies of the Septuagint. One is Vaticanus, Codex Vaticanus, an early 4th century manuscript of the Septuagint, and Alexandrinus, which is a 5th century manuscript of the Septuagint. So basically what's going on here is that when you go to Genesis chapter 5, verse 25, and you notice up here when it says, Methuselah lived 167 years. Methuselah lived 167 years. This number is what causes Methuselah to outlive the flood by 14 years, which is obviously wrong. But the other copy of the Septuagint, known as Codex Alexandrinus, which is what the marginal note says here, Codex Alexandrinus has Methuselah begetting his son at 187 years. And because of that 20-year difference, Methuselah does not die 14 years after the flood. Instead, Methuselah dies 6 years before the flood. So according to this copy of the Septuagint, Codex Alexandrinus, Methuselah does not outlive the flood. Methuselah died 6 years before the flood. And this copy of the Septuagint, which is what Stephen Anderson was holding in his hand, okay, this is the thing that he was showing off. Okay, that's the copy of the Septuagint that he's holding in his hand. And he didn't even bother to read the marginal note. Okay, now, this is called the Orthodox Study Bible. This is a newer translation of the Septuagint. And when you look up Genesis 5:25 in this copy of the Septuagint, which is all, you know, the Orthodox Church follows the Septuagint. A lot of people don't know that. Notice what it says here. Genesis 5:25, it says, now Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. So notice how the Orthodox Study Bible, also a translation of the Septuagint, the Greek Septuagint, 187 years. Okay? So the Orthodox Study Bible, this is a translation of the Septuagint, and they go with 187 years. They're following Codex Alexandrinus. They're not following Codex Vaticanus. They're following Codex Alexandrinus. You can tell because it says 187 years. So this copy of the Septuagint has Methuselah dying 6 years before the flood, not 14 years after the flood. Now, what I want to show you here is when you go to some of these online websites, like this is some website called lopost.net or whatever it is. This is a free online website that has a copy of the Greek Septuagint. Notice how it says English translation by L.C.L. Brenton. Okay, Brenton made this translation in the 1800s, and the copyright is expired. So this copy of the Septuagint is now public domain. And so you're going to find this on free internet websites. And so when you look it up in here, let me just highlight verse 25. Let's see here. If you look at verse 25 here, look at what it says. It says, and Methuselah lived 167 years and begot Lamech. This is Brentons Septuagint. It says he lived 167 years. This causes Methuselah to outlive the flood by 14 years. So because Brentons Septuagint is public domain, the copyright is expired, you find a bunch of free internet websites. You got a bunch of free internet websites out there that have Brentons Septuagint, which has Methuselah outliving the flood by 14 years. Okay, but the Orthodox Study Bible, this is a newer translation of the Greek Septuagint. The copyright is still intact. You're not going to find this on a free website. Okay, the only thing you're going to find online would be like if you go to the Apple App Store, maybe Google has an app store. The Orthodox Study Bible. I paid $10 for this thing. This is not a free website. This is an application. I paid $10 for it. And when you look it up in here, what do we find? We find that it says, now Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. See, this is basically, this is the application, the phone application that goes along with this book. They're the same translation, basically. So if you actually pay for this Bible, and if you actually pay for this app, Methuselah lives 187 years. He dies 6 years before the flood, not 14 years after the flood. He died 6 years before the flood. Okay? And that is the, it disappeared on me. Well, anyway. The Orthodox Study Bible application. And so here's what's so ironic about this. You know, Stephen Anderson, this is the Bible that he's holding up. And he didn't even bother to read that marginal note. And so he's talking to people about how, oh, you can't trust this Greek Septuagint because it has Methuselah outliving the flood by 14 years. And he doesn't even bother to inform his attentive audience that there's a marginal note within that book that he's holding in his hand. That book that he's holding in his hand has a marginal note indicating that there's actually another ancient manuscript of the Septuagint that actually has Methuselah dying 6 years before the flood, not after. But of course, he doesn't tell his congregation. You know, when you go before a judge, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. He's not telling the whole truth here. He's telling a half-truth. Yeah, half of the truth is that there is an ancient copy of the Septuagint that has Methuselah outliving the flood. But there's another ancient copy of the Septuagint that has him dying 6 years before the flood. And there are other English translations of the Septuagint that have Methuselah dying 6 years before the flood. But of course, Stephen Anderson doesn't tell you that. He would rather tell you the half-truth and deceive you into thinking that all copies of the Septuagint have Methuselah outliving the flood. This is ridiculous. And, you know, this is one of the things that people who attack the Septuagint, this is one of the things that they say. But the fact of the matter is the early church used the Septuagint, and they defended that translation.
Well done. Well done. Well done! Well done!